Hello, Year 11. This is your fourth lesson studying A Christmas Carol, or a revision at least. We're going to focus today on Jacob Marley and how he presents Dickens' social views. So the first word we're going to revise is individualist. I'd like you to think about what that means and how Scrooge and Mr. Burling from Inspector Calls are both presented as individualists. Last lesson we looked at forbearance. So try and recall the definition of that word and consider how the charity workers show forbearance towards Scrooge in Stave 1. Pause the video and answer those two questions. Our new word today is fettered. Fettered simply means chained. Many of you may have already known that from when we studied this last year. So fettered simply means chained. What can you remember about why Jacob Marley is fettered? Why is he chained? Let's pause the video, answer that question, please. So an individualist is somebody who only focuses on themselves and their own well-being, or potentially the well-being of their close family. Mr. Burling is an individualist because of his every man for himself attitude that he expresses throughout the play. He does not care about anybody apart from himself and his family, their reputation and their own financial gain. Scrooge equally is an individualist, as we see with charity workers. He doesn't care about anyone other than himself, doesn't feel that it's his business to worry about the well-being of anybody else, and feels that the poor could just lay down and die for all he cares. Now, the charity workers show forbearance towards Scrooge because no matter his disgusting and disgraceful views, they remain polite and respectful and patient, and eventually just walk out and leave him. Now, hopefully from last year, you remember that Jacob Marley was Scrooge's ex-business partner who died 7 years ago. And he is fettered, he is chained, because each link in that chain symbolise or represent a sin that he committed in life. And because he died an unrepentant sinner, somebody who didn't seek forgiveness for his sins, he is being punished in purgatory and having to drag along this big heavy chain. So our knowledge goal today is to revise how Dickens presents his social views through the character of Jacob Marley. So we're going to read the section today, think about how they show Dickens' views and intentions, and then you're going to be focusing on some questions and completing a short summary task to demonstrate your understanding of how Jacob Marley, as well as some of the other characters we've looked at in Stave 1, how do they present Dickens' social views. So please pause the video and answer that question. So we are going to be reading the section at the end of Stave 1 where we meet Jacob Marley and he visits Scrooge, and we're going to be returning to the PowerPoint to answer the following questions. So, sorry, I'm just trying to find the right place now. So what we have here, and I'm not necessarily going to read all of this, is we have, remember, the build-up, the sort of Gothic horror style build-up here, where he can hear the chains being dragged, dragging a heavy chain. And then eventually the cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floor below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His colour changed though when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up, so the fire leaps up in the chimney breast, as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. So he's almost got this ghostly air around him, his hair, and his clothes are sort of, moving in this unseen wind. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. So we have this mention of the chain. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. So we're just going to skip over this next section, because it really is just Scrooge refusing to believe that Jacob Marley is real, really. So they have this sort of backwards and forwards, really, where Marley, tries to ask Scrooge, why don't you believe in me? And then, this is when Scrooge describes Marley as an undigested piece of beef, etc. It's what is quite interesting, though, is even though he is afraid, it says the truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his... For the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. So it's almost a front Scrooge is putting on. He is, in fact, very scared, as anyone would be if a ghost sort of popped up in front of you. So again, we're just going to skip a little bit again to the important part. So Jacob Marley, getting a little bit annoyed that Scrooge doesn't believe in him anymore, sort of starts to try and be a little bit more frightening to convince him. So at this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon and a faint. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round his head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Now, this is important because what we're seeing here, with falling upon his knees, we're showing this sort of first glimmer of emotion, really, of the fact that he can feel anything at all. Mercy, he said, dreadful apparition. Apparition is just another word for ghost. Why do you trouble me? Man of the worldly mind, replied the ghost, do you believe in me or not? I do, said Scrooge, I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. It is required of every man, the ghost returned, that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. So essentially what Jacob Marley is saying here is when you are alive, as a person, you should associate in a positive way with the other people in your community and in your society, and travel far and wide. So experience, all the different people in society. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, so if you don't do that, if you only care about yourself and have an individualist attitude, it is condemned to do so after death. So if you do not behave in a kind, generous, thoughtful way in life towards others, you are condemned, you are punished when you die. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. So Jacob Marley is punished with the knowledge that he should have lived his life in a better, more moral way that would have not only caused himself more happiness, but those around him. And all he can do is watch life go on around him, but he is unable to affect it now because he's a ghost. Again, the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, chained, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. I wear the chain I forged in life. So he created his chain. He is responsible. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. So he is saying, I created my chain. I am responsible for my fate. It is my fault. And this chain symbolises and represents, link by link, every sin that he committed in life. Is its pattern strange to you? Scrooge trembled more and more. Or would you know, pursued the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? So Scrooge can't see it yet because he's not dead. But he will wear a similar chain when he dies. It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain. Ponderous means heavy. So Scrooge's chain was as bad as Jacob Marley's when Jacob Marley first died. Scrooge's is going to be even heavier because he has 7 more years of committing sins on earth. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob, he said imploringly, oh, Jacob Marley, tell me more, speak comfort to me, Jacob. So again, we're seeing more emotion from Scrooge. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions. He's referring to God here, or the spirits that are going to visit Scrooge. Comes from other reasons, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. So it's a bit of a dig there. You know, what makes you think you, the kind of man you are, what makes you think you deserve comfort? Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. So Jacob Marley has been allowed, presumably by God, to visit Scrooge, but there are limits to what he can say and do. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. Sorry, it's not very... So he can't ever sleep, he can't rest, he's always moving, always restless. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. So again, because he was only focused on his business and making money like Scrooge, he is being punished for that. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets, pondering on what the ghost had said. He did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in a business-like manner, though with humility and deference. So Scrooge doesn't really understand what Jacob means, that he has never been able to leave. Slow, the ghost repeated. 7 years dead and travelling all this time? The whole time, said the ghost. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. So in the afterlife, he is being punished through feeling guilt. We have, I don't know whoever's students book this was, decided they were probably bored listening at this point and decided to draw a little ghost so we can all marvel at their artistic skills. You travel fast, said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. Oh, captive, bound and double-ironed, cried the phantom, not to know that ages of incessant labour by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. So, you know, no matter how much he may want to make amends and how much he may regret it now, it's too little too late for Jacob Marley. Yet such was I, oh, such was I. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to imply this to himself. So he's interestingly comparing himself to Marley. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hand. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. So he's saying here, I should have been concerned not with my own personal business and my own financial gain. I should have been concerned with the common welfare of my fellow man, making sure that everybody is okay, being generous, showing charity, showing mercy and kindness to others. That should have been what I lived my life doing, rather than my own individual wealth. But again, he's learned that lesson too late. It held up its chain at arm's length as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. So again, Christmas makes it suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down? Now, there's some symbolism there for his own willful ignorance, like Scrooge, refusing to actually go out amongst the poor and be less ignorant about what their lives are like. He turns his eyes away from that suffering, as did Jacob Marley, and never raised them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode, where there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me. Now, this is alluding to the Nativity, obviously the birth of Christ, which is this Christian celebration of Christmas. And again, we know there's lots and lots of Christian allegorical readings of this novel, which we will speak about at another lesson. So we're going to, again, skip a little bit. And basically what we have here is, you know, Scrooge is sort of begging for help. You know, what can I do? And the ghost says, that is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you might yet have a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. So Jacob is saying, by coming here, you have a chance to escape my fate. You don't have to end up like me. You were always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank you. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance's expression fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. Without their visit, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. So he's saying it is only through the visit of these 3 ghosts that you have a chance to not end up like me. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. And then again, we basically have him just explain that he'll be visited by a ghost at 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, then 1 o'clock, etc. So Jacob Marley goes and he walks backwards and basically ends up sort of leaving. So we're going to go back from here. Not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible, this is Scrooge, Jacob Marley sort of flies out this window, of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation, sadness and regret, wailings, inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusation. Oh, I can't speak. Sorry, it's really confusing trying to go between the screen and this visualizer. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge, that's like sort of sad sound, and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. So Jacob Marley joins the sort of wailful, moaning, depressing sound. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity, and he looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might have been guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat and with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant, whom it saw below upon the doorstep. The misery with them was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. So this is really, really important, because what Jacob Marley shows Scrooge finally is that Jacob Marley and Scrooge, if he dies and doesn't change, are not the only people to have this fate. So, and again, this is a deliberately powerful message for the rich reader. Dickens isn't just saying this will be Scrooge's fate if he doesn't change. He is saying this could be anyone's fate. This could be your fate if you are identifying with some of Scrooge's beliefs and attitudes. This could be you, reader, when you die. And remember, they were all Christian. They all believed in heaven, where you went if you were a decent person, you know, even if you'd sinned, you'd, you know, sought forgiveness and tried to make up for what you've done. If you were an unrepentant sinner, you could go to either purgatory or hell. Hell was really for, you know, the very evilest of people. Purgatory was this almost in-between place where you hadn't necessarily been awful enough to go to hell, but certainly hadn't been good enough to go to heaven. So all of these ghosts are in purgatory. Interesting that there are some linked together that could be guilty governments. Scrooge, a lot of these were business associates of Scrooge's as well. And their punishment, like Jacob, is to be chained, but also to, again, one ghost is crying, realizing that there's a poor woman and her baby. And now that he's dead, he realizes he should help them, but he can't. And that punishment, that guilt, is one of the things that they're being punished with in purgatory. So we're going to switch back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to bring back up those questions. And what I want you to do in the last bit of the lesson is have a go at answering, firstly, those questions. Sorry, it should appear any second. There we go. So I'd like you to pause the video now and have a go at briefly answering those questions. So pause the video, use what you've just learned as well as your prior knowledge to answer the questions. Next, I'd like you to think back to the last sort of 3 lessons that we've done. And I'd like you to write a sort of 1-paragraph summary. How does Dickens present his social beliefs in Stave 1? So you might want to think about Scrooge, the way he describes him and what he represents, how Bob and Fred juxtapose Scrooge and how that presents his social beliefs, as well as the charity workers and Jacob Marley. So you're just writing a final summary. How does Dickens present his social beliefs in Stave 1? You may want to use those bullet points to help you. So you can pause the video now to write your summary. Finally, I'd just like you to answer the final question. Why does Marley wish he showed more forbearance in his life? So why is Marley so regretful about his lack of patience, his lack of charity, and his lack of kindness during his life? Well done, guys. Tomorrow we will move on to Stave 2. As always, if you have any questions, please email your class teacher, and I'll see you tomorrow.